Well, here we are. 2024 is drawing to a close. The end is nigh. And what a year it has been. Pretty eventful times we're living in, I might say. But over the course of this year, I was able to read right around 52 books, give or take. And that's pretty much right where I want it to be because, a book a week is pretty much what I shoot for. So I was able to more or less reach my goal. So I feel pretty good about that. But now that we are here at the end of the year, it is time for the end of the year ranking, where I rank the best and the worst of the books which I read over the course of the year. Now, before we get started, I just want to kind of lay out some preliminary ground rules and stipulations pertaining to how this ranking is going to go. So first off, the individual reviews that I have done of each of these works, and I think I have reviewed all of them, so I'm not going to spend much time recapping those reviews here. If you would like to see like the full in-depth review of these works, then go check out my back catalog here on my channel and watch those. But the individual reviews that I've done of these works were intended to be as objective as possible, but this ranking is going to be much more subjective in nature. This is just me ranking the books that resonated with me the most powerfully, that I responded to most strongly. So, like I said, the individual reviews that I've done were meant to be objective, but this is just my personal subjective ranking here. So some books on this list may be ranked higher than others, even though I may have given them like a lower rating when I reviewed them. But again, that was objective. This is subjective. So this is just my personal picks for the books that really struck me the most. Okay, and number two, I read several works over the course of the year of a more philosophical nature. In those works, I generally abstain from rating. And for that reason, I have excluded them from the running. So, Wittgenstein, Spengler, Plato, none of them are going to be on here because, like I said, I have excluded non-fictional works of a philosophical nature from this ranking. And third, last year, I think, tried to do a 10 worst and 10 best and kind of alternate. But I'm not going to do that this year because really I didn't read that many books this year that I can say are really the worst. Now, I could have just used like the 10 books which I liked the least, but I'm not going to do that because there really weren't a lot of books that I read this year that really aroused my ire. Only two did that. So for this ranking this year, this time around, the worst books are not going to be just the ones that I liked the least, but rather the books that I actively disliked. And that only came out to two books this year. And we're going to start with the worst. Give you the bad news first, right? So, with all that out of the way, let's start the ranking with the number 2 worst book that I read in 2024, and that would be Adventures in Immediate Irreality by Max Blecker. Now, again, like I said, I'm not going to recap a lot of my reviews with these books, but this is a pretty obscure book by a pretty obscure Romanian author from the early 20th century. And this book was a whole lot of nothing. Actually, it's not even a whole lot of nothing. It is a very brief book, but it's just nothing. These are the kind of books that I do not have patience for, because this book did one of the most frustrating things that a book can do. It wasted my time. Last year I read The Turner Diaries, right? And even though that book was abysmal, both in a literary and in a moral capacity, Even with something like that, there's still something there to appreciate because it at least keeps you hooked, right? Like it at least maintains your attention. But that was not the case with Adventures in Immediate Irreality. I cannot remember the name of any of the characters in this book, including the main character, the narrator. And I can't remember anything that happens in this book. It's just it did not have a plot in the conventional sense. Rather, it was just a series of vignettes that are just barely connected. It was boring. The writing was okay, but it wasn't really that great. The characters evinced by the fact that I don't remember any of them. I think they sucked. Um, it's just a waste of time. These are the kind of books that I truly just don't have any patience for anymore. Books that do nothing, say nothing, that are just kind of self-indulgent exercises in basically just kind of existential journalizing or something like that. That's the best way I can describe this book. It sucked. I really did not like this book because, like I said, it wasted my time. So, for that reason, Adventures in Immediate Irreality by Max Blecker is my number 2 worst book of 2024. Now, um, my number 1 worst book of 2024, and I can hear the hisses and boos out there because this is kind of a darling, it seems like, here on BookTube. Most of the reviews of this book that I've seen on here are pretty glowing. People really respond to it. I did not. In the words of the Emperor,
let the hate flow through you.
Because my number 1 worst book of 2024 was The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. This book was not for me, and that really surprised me because I had really thought that it was going to be. But boy, was I mistaken. This book is pure twaddle, I think. It is the most cringy thing I have ever read. I don't even think this should have been published because this book is literally just a bunch of journal entries and notes and crap that were kept in a trunk and were only like dragged out after the author's death. And I don't think they should have been because this book was freaking awful, I thought. And again, I had people say, well, you didn't read it right because I plowed through this like a novel, and this is not a novel in the conventional sense. Um, I read it in like a week or two, just head down trying to get through it. And I had people say, well, you don't read it like that. You read like an excerpt every night, and then you put it on your nightstand, and then you reflect on it. You cogitate on it. You let the words float around in your head and you think about it and you read it piecemeal. You read it a little bit at a time. Don't just plow through it like I did. Well, I think if you read it that way, you can trick yourself into thinking that this book is more than just the repetitive, mind-numbing drivel that it is. Because reading it as I did, which is just like, um, assholes and elbows, right? Just trying to get through it. Uh, I barely could get through this. It was painful. It was so embarrassing at times. It really is. This like hyper poetic, basically nonsensical gibberish that it just reads like the ramblings of a dork. That is what this book is. The Book of Disquiet is the ramblings of a dork. That is what it is and all it is. And you know what? If you think that this book is some kind of masterpiece, kudos. If it works for you, I guess, to each their own, I'll say. But for me, this book was just absolutely awful. It really is just like reading the same handful of things over and over and over again. So much of it just feels redundant. It is a long ass book. It's almost like 500 pages. and it's just stupid. It felt like to me, like to give you a perfect example of what reading this book is like. Um, there's this excerpt here on page in this edition 166. It's entry 189 entitled Rainy Day, and it reads as follows. The air is a veiled yellow, like a pale yellow seen through a dirty white. There's scarcely any yellow in the gray air, but the paleness of the gray has a yellow in its sadness.
Wow!
Yeah, it's just twaddle. It is just twaddle, start to finish. This book just was a horrible experience, the worst experience that I had reading in 2024, and for that reason, it topped the list of the worst in the number one spot. Okay, but now that's all of the bad books. So now we're on to the 10 best books which I read in 2024. We got the bad out of the way. Now we're moving on to the good. And coming in at number 10 on my list of the best books that I read in 2024, we have, now you see why I had to have the table in front of me, whereas I usually don't. We have um, In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. Now, this, I should say here now, I'm including series as one entry. This is technically one long novel, kind of. And this might be kind of cheating because the first two volumes of this I actually read last year in December of 2023, but the bulk of it I read this year. Um, and this is one of the most intensive reading accomplishments I think I've ever had. And honestly, I wasn't even sure I was going to put this on the list here because these books were not always enjoyable. In fact, reading In Search of Lost Time was a real slog at times. The first volume I actually liked more than I was anticipating. The second volume I actually really liked. That one actually is quite enjoyable. But the third volume, that was brutal. The fourth volume, slightly less brutal, but still pretty brutal. And then the fifth and sixth volumes, um, still pretty brutal. But what made me decide to include this, what got this over the line, so to speak, and edged it out into my 10 best reads was the seventh and final volume, Time Regained, because Time Regained is one of the most transcendent reading experiences I've ever had. And it's funny because the last couple volumes of this work are seriously unfinished. There are a lot of mistakes, there are a lot of um, issues that needed ironing out, a lot of editorial work that needed to be done. Certain characters die and then reappear, but despite its unfinished and unpolished nature, the contents of Time Regained, the heart of Time Regained, was powerful enough to earn this the number 10 spot in my best reads of 2024 because it is truly transcendent. The musings on time and memory and loss, and the stuff that constitutes a human life. It is gorgeous. It is stunning. It is striking. It is deeply poignant. And so, even though overall this wasn't necessarily the most enjoyable reading experience I've ever had, it is one of the greatest, like I said, greatest and most intensive accomplishments I've ever had reading. And so that coupled with the uh, the transcendent nature of the final volume, Time Regained, it edged it out. And so Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, I'm putting at my number 10 best read of 2024. Now, on to number 9. And my number 9 pick for the best reads of 2024 was this book right here, Fog by Miguel de Unamuno. This is a kind of deceptive book, and it's also a pretty obscure book. It's which is odd because it really shouldn't be. It's kind of an early example of modernist literary experimentalism from the early 20th century. But it's kind of gotten overshadowed, I feel like, by later books. And that's a real shame because this is a really neat little book. And again, as I said, it's pretty deceptive because when you start out reading it, you think it's just like some kind of Bildungsroman about this kind of schmuck who's kind of navigating a love triangle situation, looking for love, right, in all the wrong places, apparently. But then by the end of this book, it turns into something completely different. It goes very, very heavily into metafiction, which I'm a sucker for. I love metafiction. But beyond that, it becomes a really thoughtful reflection on reality and free will, and also the nature of art and artistic creation. And really, this book is just so charming. It really is. It's not it's kind of written with its tongue in its cheek. It's kind of sarcastic a little bit. It feels like it's again playing it really tongue in cheek, but it still manages to be quite endearing. It's a very well written book, I think. But really, I just love how it transformed into something completely different by the end than it had seemed to be at the outset. And really, it's a book that I think deserves to be more well known now because it kind of prefigures a lot of the experimentalism which would manifest in literature later on throughout the 20th century. So, yeah, my number nine pick for the best reads of 2024 is Miguel de Unamuno's Fog. Kind of obscure book now, but one that really doesn't deserve to be, and one that has a lot to say and says it in a very charming and disarming fashion. So yeah, number nine, Fog by Miguel de Unamuno. Now, number eight, I have Somalio Pardulis by Otto Julius Bierbaum. This is an exceedingly short book. I mean, exceedingly. It's only around 60 odd pages, and some of that is illustrations. But this book yeah, crams a lot into a little. It is a gothic horror story, but with a strong, strong infusion of German romanticism, but also has some dark, macabre theological musings. It's also a pretty thoughtful book. Um, it is kind of grotesque at times, but it was always engaging. It really sucked me in. Again, it's very short, only like 60 odd pages, but it takes you on a journey. It's kind of bigger than the sum of its parts, I suppose. It seems like it has such unusual reflections on the nature of God and being, kind of blasphemous reflections on those topics. But then it also features some good old fashioned gothic horror, including some incest, kind of edgy for the time, I guess, because this was written in the early 20th century. Um, Sort of edgy, but it's always interesting. It was always interesting, and the way it's told is kind of um, inventive, I think. It's just this is a very obscure book. In fact, Otto Julius Bierbaum, I think this is the only work of his that has been translated into English at this time. And that may be a real shame because Somalio Pardulis was a banger of a read. I really love this little book. It was fascinating, darkly so, but just a really neat little book that kind of marries some unusual elements together, perhaps, but to intriguing effect. So, yeah, at number eight, I have Somalio Pardulis by Otto Julius Bierbaum. Now, coming in at number seven, and now you're going to see again why have the I had to have the table. We have The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. All three, or really, I guess, all five volumes, because it's a these are omnibuses. This is volume 1 and 2, volume 3 and 4, and then volume 5. This is, you may uh, be aware, a very, very highly regarded work of science fiction. In fact, depending on who you ask, it may be like the pinnacle of science fiction. And I uh, think that its reputation is pretty much wholly justified. This is literature. This is science fiction literature from a time when science fiction was not yet as accepted in the literary mainstream as it would later become. But this book is also kind of a puzzle box. Again, I'm not going to summarize or recap any of the stuff that I said in my review, or not much of the stuff that I said in my review here. But the Book of the New Sun is uh, it is a very deep work. It's a book that you can read a lot into, and which you're going to have to read a lot into to understand it, because it does not reveal its secrets very uh, easily. It's something you kind of have to work for, and it's designed to be read multiple times. It was designed, as I'm given to understand it, from the ground up to be a book that only pays out upon rereading, and it's kind of, I guess, the gift that keeps on giving. But this book is really, really great. I think the writing is a cut above your typical science fiction fare, especially for the time. Um, the character, the main character, the narrator, Severian, is not by any stretch of the imagination the most likable character, but he is interesting. And the journey that he goes on across these books is definitely interesting. It is a book. I'm not going to spoil anything here because I did that in the reviews. But it is a book that tells a story in that it's very hard to kind of resist easy summary, because there's just so much going on. But the way that these books go, the kind of circular, actually it's not circular, it's kind of a spiral, rather, like the arc of these books, the arc of their story is, it's like a spiral, especially when you get to the fifth book. And the fifth book, it's there's kind of some contention there whether it was actually wholly necessary or not. I think, or at least right now, I think it probably is, because I don't know that you could possibly make sense of, get like the full picture without the fifth volume. uh, but once you finish this one and you see kind of the nature of the story, the kind of recursive nature of the story, the kind of Nietzschean eternal return nature of the story, it is kind of a head trip. It really is. These books are, um, they're also laudable, I think, because they were able to take such stock standard elements of science fiction, like aliens and robots and time travel, but it makes those things feel so new and fresh, and also very alien and truly exotic. And I was really appreciative of that when reading these books. They're truly uh, at the top of the pile when it comes to science fiction. They're truly literature. I had a blast reading these books. They're every bit as trippy and demanding as you've probably heard them to be. But it's worth taking the trip. It really is. It's a journey worth going on. I'm glad I did. And so, yeah, at my number 7 place, I have The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. Now, um, at my number, you have to bear with me as I put these back under the thing. At my number 6 spot, my number 6 pick for the best reads of 2024, we have Cain by Lord Byron. This is kind of an exception to a rule that I generally have when it comes to the inverted villain narrative, where you take a character who is typically depicted as a villain. In this case, the biblical figure Cain, the premier murderer, and you twist that to where they're actually the hero. In general, I don't really like that kind of thing, but I did with this one. This is kind of the exception to that rule. This is uh, able to do that in a way that actually truly like feels well done. That truly manages to feel as subversive as it really wants to. By taking the figure of Cain, who is typically depicted as a bloodthirsty murderer, and twisting it to where he is actually a kind of a sensitive soul who's kind of averse to violence, but also kind of has a irascible temper, and then actually making the big man be perhaps the one that's more bloodthirsty. It's able to twist the story, the biblical story, on its head to intriguing effect, I think. And also, this is just Lord Byron top to bottom. It really is. This is pure Byron. Byron manages to somehow make himself be both the angsty titular character as well as the edgelord Lucifer character, and also manages to draw attention to his own incestuous tendencies in this book. Again, it's just Byron all around in this, but uh, the poetry is pretty powerful. I mean, it should be. It's freaking Byron, um, but the story is poignant, and also it gets a lot into a little, because again this is very short work, just a little closet drama, but it packs a punch. It raises some interesting questions about the nature of human suffering, and also about the nature of animal suffering as well. And also kind of raises some questions about the necessity of sacrifice and why um, a higher power might demand blood. It's this book, if you weren't aware, caused a stir when it was published way back in its day, because it was so subversive, or perceived to be traditional biblical doctrine. That Byron kind of had to back up and say, "Whoa, it's just a work of art. It's just it's not, and you shouldn't say that this is me. We have to separate the art from the artist." I don't think that's actually true. I think that's what Byron hid behind. But I think that Cain is actually a pretty insightful glimpse into Byron's mind. Uh, and it's a very thoughtful, but also a very moving work. And I really liked it. It's short and sweet, but it packs a punch, and it may just stay with you. So yeah, at number 6 on my list of the best reads of 2024, we have Cain by Lord Byron. Now, coming in at number 5, we have Ben Sinister by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, this is the 4th Nabokov book that I have read, and it is, to date, my favorite. I've read Lolita, I've read Pale Fire, I've read uh, Invitation to a Beheading, and I've read this one. But this one is my personal favorite, even though I will concede, as I conceded in my review of it, that it is not the best book. Lolita is the better book, if only because of the writing. Because the one real issue that I had with Ben Sinister was that the writing, it's a little bit much at times, as in it goes to like full prose territory. I think at times it's very unrestrained writing, and I think it goes a little over the edge at times. But the actual story of this I found quite gripping. It is decidedly grittier than your typical Nabokov fare, because Nabokov, even though you would think that Lolita would probably be like a really dark, twisted story. I mean, and it is, but it's also irreverently humorous and kind of all out hilarious at times. But this book is much more grim than your typical Nabokov book, even though it does still have quite a bit of the sardonic humor, the kind of cheekiness that is kind of a hallmark of Nabokov. But this is also, I think, the most personal book that Nabokov ever wrote, excluding, of course, his actual autobiography, Speak Memory. Of his novels, this, I think, is the most personal and revealing that he ever wrote, because he actually includes a foreword to the book that urges the reader not to read too much into it. That it's only art for art's sake. There's no message to this. Um, but I think, as I said in my review, that it's kind of methinks he doth protest too much situation, because this is intimately Nabokov. This is intimately tied to his own actual history, and I think it displays some of his feelings and sentiments regarding that history. But it's also a very compelling story at its heart about a father trying to shield his young son from a brutal totalitarian regime. And that's another thing. This is a dystopian novel that predates 1984, like the quintessential dystopian novel. And it's a real shame that this book has been overshadowed, not only by later works of dystopian fiction like 1984, but also just by Nabokov's own later works as well, because it is a great book. It is a really great book, and also what really like was the icing on the cake for this was the ending, because this goes full on metafictional by the end, and I loved the way that it did. Nabokov was always one to kind of toy with and tinker with the very fabric of narration, the very manner in which a story is told. And this book does it, and you might not see it coming how this book ends. It comes right out of left field, but I think it works, or at least it worked for me. It's a very unique way to wrap up this story, but I loved it. My favorite Nabokov book, personally, so far, Ben Sinister, and also one of the most brilliantly titled books ever. The title of this work is, you could spend some time dissecting that in itself, but the just the title, Ben Sinister, brilliant, brilliant book. The writing is a little bit fruity at times, but that aside, it's a great book. I love it. So yeah, coming in at number 5, we have Ben Sinister by Vladimir Nabokov. And coming in at number 4, best read of 2024, we have The Sunset Limited by Cormac McCarthy. Now, Cormac McCarthy's reputation has recently, it seems, taken something of a hit due to some sordid things which he may or may not have done in his past. I don't know too much about that. I haven't delved off all that deeply into that. Although I guess the rule holds true: never meet your heroes, perhaps. But this book is one of the few works of McCarthy's that I had yet to read. I'd read all his novels and ranked those. In this book, The Sunset Limited kind of teeters on the brink of novel and play. It is technically a play, but one subtitled A Novel in Dramatic Form, which I think is a fitting descriptor. Uh, this is not by any means one of McCarthy's grandest or most spectacular works, but it is, I think, one of the most perfect. The idea of this work, the premise of it, is very simple but executed roundly, excellently, I think. This came out of that creative boom period that he had in the early 2000s, like 2004 to 2006, when he put out No Country for Old Men and The Road and this. And honestly, I would rank this quite highly in McCarthy's overall body of work. Um, this is a two-person play, a two-person show, um, which consists of kind of an ideological sparring match between two characters who are only ever identified by their ethnic identities, that is, black and white. Black is an evangelical Christian, and white is a militantly atheist college professor who is suicidally depressed, and the entire work just consists of them debating their respective worldviews. It is a deeply thoughtful work which is intimately concerned with notions of faith and doubt and belief and disbelief, and it really does get to the heart of a lot of key issues, I think, regarding religious belief and religious disbelief. Um, It is quite an intimate work, and these characters really do come alive. The personalities of these characters shine through quite well, I think. But it's also deeply humane. It is a very sensitive work, I think. Um, and again, it's not the most spectacular thing that McCarthy ever wrote, but it is one of the most perfectly executed. In fact, the only real complaint that I had with this is that I was left wanting more. I think he could have, maybe done a little bit more with it than he did, maybe gotten a little bit more out of it. But what he did do with it is fantastic. I think it is very, very compelling, and it's something that will give you food for thought, something to chew on, I think. Yeah, I just really love this book. I think it is a great kind of minor masterpiece. And again, I would rank it highly in his bibliography. So yeah, number four, best read of 2024, The Sunset Limited by Cormac McCarthy. Now, number three, best read of 2024, and I can hear the boos and hisses out there already. I can feel the controversy fomenting, but come what may, I'm standing by this. And number three, best read for me was The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. So yeah, Ayn Rand, obviously a perennially controversial author, but an unjustly maligned author literarily, I think. Her philosophy you can agree or disagree with, but she was a more than capable writer, I think. And I think that she gets way too much shit literarily because this book, The Fountainhead, is a stone cold masterpiece, I think. I rated this book, I think, an A, and it earned it. It absolutely did. This is truly one of the greatest portrayals of the individual versus the collective ever put to paper. Um, Rourke is truly one of just the greatest literary chads of all time. And that's the thing about Ayn Rand. There are so many people out there I know that are like, I just don't understand how these books can get people in their thrall, how her ideas can seduce so many people, but you can never discount the importance of the cool factor. And the fact remains that Rourke is just truly one of the coolest characters in literature. He don't give a damn about anything but himself. And therein lies the distinction between Ayn Rand and everybody else, I guess, because normally a character so self-centered would be depicted villainously, but not so in this. Rourke is the hero of this book, and what a hero he is. He doesn't back down. He doesn't give an inch. He holds true to himself and his vision, and he does not compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon, to quote Rorschach from Watchmen. But also, Ellsworth Toohey, the main villain in this, what a villain. Just truly, I think, one of the greatest literary villains, and one that feels pretty real, honestly, I think. And the clash between he and Rourke is just one for the ages. Greatness versus mediocrity. It is truly just. It is an absolute banger of a book. Again, you can disagree with Ayn Rand's ideas, but she was quite the writer, I think, and this book evinces that. It's a brick, it is a long book, but I think it uses its page count wisely. And again, I was hooked start to finish. The characters in this book are probably distinct from the characters in most other books, given that Ayn Rand's approach to characterization is pretty different from other authors. But the characters in this book, they have an impact. They do. Again, Rourke is just absolute Chad, just one of the greatest individualists ever written. Just an absolute. He just truly one of the greatest individualistic heroes. And again, the whole central theme of this book of the individual struggling against the herd it's timeless. It is absolutely timeless. It will never cease to be relevant, I don't think. And yeah, I just thought this book was a masterpiece. It is. It is probably Ayn Rand's most accomplished book literarily. And yeah, hate me if you want. I don't care. Well, much like the main character of this book, you know, um, water off a duck's ass. So yeah, number three best read of 2024, as controversial as it may be, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And now coming in at number two, we have A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. I'm really surprised that I had not gotten around to reading this book sooner because it's such a prominent book, it seems, when it comes to lists of the greatest works of the 20th century. And I have to say, I fully agree with this book being rated so highly because this is, uh, I mean, it's a masterpiece. It is an absolute masterpiece. It can kind of be hard to read at first due to um, the slang lexicon that it is written in, but once you get the hang of it, once you kind of get a grasp of the language of it, it is both a thrilling read, but it is also deeply thoughtful, and the message behind it is, um, it was surprisingly a Christian message. It was surprisingly kind of a more conservative and Christian outlook behind this book than I had thought it would be. I mean, Burgess was himself a lapsed Catholic, and that shines through here because the central issue of this book is free will, whether it is better to be voluntarily wicked or artificially righteous. This book is it's short. It's in fact it's a very short novel, or perhaps like a novella, perhaps. Um, but it packs a punch. It gets a lot out of its premise. It is thrilling in a kind of horrifying, violent, gratuitous way. Uh, but again, it is not without a very ponderous element underpinning the whole thing. And so, yeah, you get the best of both worlds. It's entertaining, but it's also um, reflective, and it gives you a lot to chew on, I think. I love this book. Again, I can't believe it took me this long to get around to reading this, but I'm so glad I did. I haven't seen the movie, the very famous Stanley Kubrick film based on this. I would like to, but um, I love the book. I can say that. I absolutely love the book. And because of that, Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange is my number two pick for the best reads of 2024. And now, drum roll please, the number one best book that I read in 2024 was The Tragedy of Man by Imre Madoc. I'm probably butchering that name. That's a Hungarian name, and this is apparently uh, the basically the supreme achievement of Hungarian literature. This is a closet drama about the newly fallen Adam and Eve as they are taken on a visionary tour through human history to come, where they are kind of goaded by Lucifer to just give up, just off themselves. Don't even give the human uh, experience a chance. Just nip it in the bud and stop it before it even starts. Really. Um, and this book is truly one of the most ambitious things that I have ever read. It reminded me, as I mentioned in my review of it, it's very reminiscent of both Paradise Lost as well as Goethe's Faust, but I think it stands shoulder to shoulder with those works, if not surpasses one or both of them. Um, you know, I, what I guess ideally literature should do is to try to encapsulate as much of the human condition as it can. And few works out there, I think, do that quite as ambitiously as this, because this book is going for it. Like it, again, the scope of it is just so broad. It's not even that long of a work. but the way that it unfolds, the shape of things to come that Adam and Eve are shown in this, and their reactions to the kind of just perpetual failure of humanity to live up to their potential. It is sobering, but it rings pretty true. It's thoughtful, but it's also entertaining, and it is so inventive in the way that it uh, pulls off its story. Like just the very concept of this is, I think, just so imaginative. And I mean, this is, a lot of the books I read, or some of the books at least that I read, I feel are kind of obscure, and this foremost among them. Because again, if you can't tell by this cover, this Scholar Select, this is a print-on-demand version. This is like a Xerox copy of an old library book. This is all I could get my hands on. Outside of Hungary, this seems to be pretty obscure, and that is like such a shame because, again, the ambition on display in this book is staggering. It is truly one of the most ambitious things I've ever read. The poetry of it is pretty good, striking at times. There's some pretty good lines in here. And, it really is just so intrinsically human. It captures so much of humanity, and I just adore it for that. So yeah, um, no question, my number one best read of 2024 was The Tragedy of Man by Imre Madoc. I'm probably butchering that, but doing my best. So yeah, that has been my worst and best reads of 2024. Like I said, read right around 52 odd books, give or take, in 2024. Feeling pretty good about that. That's right where I wanted to be. And yeah, I read some pretty good books, more good books than bad books, actually. So I'm happy about that. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this ranking, and perhaps I hope I can maybe inspire some of you out there to maybe pick up some of these books if you haven't already, or if you aren't familiar with these books, to maybe familiarize yourself with them. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed. And be sure down in the comments to let me know what your best reads of 2024 have been, or what your worst reads of 2024 have been. Um, Here's to 2025, and reading more books in that year. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.